You're listening to the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by Real Agriculture in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're connecting the dots between the people and the policies that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future.
Water. When we talk about water in Canada and North America, we often take water for granted. We have this abundant, natural, high-quality resource, valuable resource. But in agriculture, we're also keenly aware of the precarious relationship, perhaps increasingly precarious relationship with water, whether we're talking about multi-year droughts, flooding, future access to water for things like irrigation, processing capacity, food production for our neighbors and people around the world, as there are competing interests for that water. As I believe it was Mark Twain that wrote, "Whiskies for drinking, waters for fighting." That's what we're going to discuss as we're excited to bring back the Ag Policy Connection podcast together with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, or CAPI. I'm Kelvin Hepner for Real Agriculture, and on episode 1, Season 2 of the Ag Policy Connection, we're pleased to welcome our panelists. We have Nicolas Mesly. Nicolas is a veteran reporter who specializes in agricultural topics. He's also an agrologist and a CAPI fellow, author of several papers on this topic of water. He's based in Montreal, Quebec. And we also have Shawn Jaques. Shawn is the president and CEO of the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency, and they have some exciting things happening, which he's going to talk about when it comes to a vision for water in Saskatchewan. With no further ado, we want to welcome in our panelists for this episode focusing on water here on the Ag Policy Connection. All right, we're talking about water policy on this episode of the Ag Policy Connection, in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, or CAPI, and we're pleased to welcome Nicolas Mesly and Shawn Jaques. Nicolas is in Quebec, Shawn is in Saskatchewan. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to join us to discuss this important topic today.
Thank you for having us.
Nicolas, why don't we start with you? You have written several papers for CAPI on this important topic of water management. We often, I think, we're familiar with situations where we have too much water, we have too little water. I think most often, though, we take water for granted. Why is it important that in agriculture and in farming we think about and consider the importance of water management and water policies?
Well, Kelvin, basically, for me, I'm convinced that water quality and water quantity will redefine agriculture international trade and also domestic production. If you look at it at the context of climate change, look at what happened to Canada in 2023. You had wildfires which were bigger than Greece in terms of superficie. Then when we look at what happened in Western Canada in 2021, especially in Saskatchewan, almost half the crops has disappeared. So if we look at a country like Canada, the second biggest country in the world, the 5th largest exporter, and also we have 20% of the water world freshwater reserves. So as a country, not only for our food security, Canadian food security, we have a role to play on the international level. So we have to have a picture where we stand, where we want to go, what will be our role, especially considering that we will have to feed more than 9 billion people in 2050. So that's basically why I think it's important.
Shawn, how about your perspective from Saskatchewan, leading the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency in terms of having that vision for water and why that's important in Saskatchewan's example?
Right. And if I may, Kelvin, I'll just give a little bit of an overview of our organization, just so your listeners understand what our role is, and then I can wade into the agriculture question.
Yep, good
and
idea.
So Water Security Agency is a unique organization, and there aren't any other organizations in Canada like ours. We're a Treasury Board Crown Corporation where everything water related, or almost everything water related, is under one umbrella. And so we own and operate 72 dams in the province, a number of hundreds of kilometers of irrigation canal. We regulate the drinking water and wastewater in the province, over 800 communities for drinking water and 600 for wastewater. We're responsible for protecting aquatic habitat. We help develop irrigation, and we represent the province on transboundary water issues. So it's just important to understand our role is everything related to water. So we're there to help help agriculture. We're there to help industry. We're there to work with industry, but we're also there to protect, making sure there is a reliable, safe supply of water for the province. And so that really kind of speaks to our mission, and it is to manage Saskatchewan's water resources for a better quality of life for all of Saskatchewan. So we know water is important from everything from living, for drinking, for industry, for agriculture, and of course for recreation. So that's just a little bit about our organization.
So, Nicolas, when you look at that Saskatchewan model where they have this water security agency that has this all-encompassing view of water, or broad encompassing view, how does that compare with what we have for water policies across Canada and how we manage water across different jurisdictions?
Well, water, some of the provinces have their own law on waters, especially like if I take Quebec, the producers now have to everyone who takes more than 75,000 liters per day has to report it. So every provinces have its own, like there's no national, if I can say so, I would say strategy, or even for collecting data from a province to another, especially on groundwater. If you talk to scientists, they say we cannot compare one model for another. So one way to start would be if we have a Canadian Water Agency, which has been put in place just last summer. That would be one thing, is that if you want to know where to go, you have to be able to have data. So when you have data, you can compare through one water you can compare the problems or the things from one province to another. That's one thing. Now, when we talk about water, if we take Saskatchewan, for instance, you have a Prairie Province Water Board. So it will start from BC. If we take the water, where does it come from? It comes from Castle of Water. It could be the Sierra Nevada in California. It could be Himalaya in Tibet in Asia. In Canada, we have the Rockies. So the water comes from the mountain and goes through the prairies, and you have agreements from Alberta to Saskatchewan to Manitoba. So that's very important to be able to discuss between one province to another in terms of allocation of water. One thing is sure is that, and I said it abruptly, we don't want to have the same management as the US have. So when you look at the Colorado problem, we can come back later on that, or the California problem, Canada has to define a strategy where there is a real understanding of data and cooperation between the provinces.
And I think what you're also saying there is it needs to be a watershed-wide approach. Is that correct?
For sure. I think watershed is it's the way, water doesn't have any borders. So it has to be a watershed approach between provinces, and like Mr. Jaques mentioned, there is transboundary water. Like, let's take the Mackenzie Bay watershed. Let's take the Great Lakes. In Quebec, we share the 8th biggest lake with the U.S., which is Lake Champlain. So there's a common responsibility there to manage for the future generation, water quality and water quantity.
Yeah, I know. I'm based here in southern Manitoba, and we're heavily dependent on the Red River, which flows north from North Dakota and Minnesota. And so here I think we understand, but we also take it for granted. And Shawn, I'm sure in your role, you're working with Alberta, with Manitoba, with the states adjacent along the border as well.
Yeah, Nicolas made a very good point about transboundary water issues, and there are no boundaries when it comes to water. So, in fact, the last couple days, the Prairie Provinces Water Board is meeting here in Saskatchewan. I had the opportunity to join them yesterday for part of their meeting to talk about these important issues. And, we have a very good working relationship with our neighboring provinces. We're in constant contact with, both Alberta and Manitoba when it comes to water. Um, you know, Going into the winter when it was really dry, lack of snowpack, lack of precipitation, we were having conversations with Alberta. Just what were they seeing? Kind of what are their plans? We were sharing our plans, etc. And we have the same conversations with Manitoba. We also sit on the Mackenzie River Board, so the northern watershed with Alberta. And then we also have the international boundary, different boards that we're part of, like the Souris River Board. We do work with the International Joint Commission, discussing those watersheds that flow into the United States, like the St. Mary's Milk River watershed in southwest Saskatchewan. So it's really important. Saskatchewan. We want to ensure we get our share of the water. I mean, we have needs, whether it's for human consumption, industry and agriculture, irrigation, and then we got to make sure we pass on, our 50% of the water into Manitoba and into the United States. So we do need that cooperation between all of our neighbors.
Yeah, you talk about ensuring adequate supply. I guess that's one area where there is potential for conflict or not seeing eye to eye. Maybe I'll ask you to take us into some of your meeting rooms, Shawn. And what are some of the conflicts or issues that exist where people don't see eye to eye that you see, I guess, on your desk regularly?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we've been having conflicts, but I mean there are there are issues. We want to make sure people realize what we need to get our share of the water for Saskatchewan's use. But I am happy to say that even last year with the low flows on the South Saskatchewan River and the North Sask, we still got over 50% of the flow of that river into our province. And so then where a lot of this comes into is then how do we manage the reservoirs that we have to capture the water and utilize it when it's drier? And, we just issued our annual or our latest spring runoff report, and the majority of our reservoirs are full or near full. And so we're in a pretty good spot. Our largest reservoir, Lake Diefenbaker, going into the fall of 23, there was a lack of precipitation. We knew there was, low snowpack in the mountains. We modified our operating plan of that reservoir, and we reduced the outflows of Diefenbaker because normally we reduce the water in order to capture, that spring runoff and help for flood protection. We were confident that there wasn't going to be a flood risk. So we kept more water in the lake without impacting downstream users like other communities and First Nations. And so where we landed was, right now, Lake Diefenbaker has a meter of water more than it did in 2023 and almost 2 meters more than 2022. And so that's a significant amount of water. So I guess my point is we're working with our neighbors. We got our 50% share of the water, plus the flows were less than normal, but we still got our 50%. But then we operated our structures accordingly to try to capture as much as we can to use for this upcoming year.
Nicolas, as you survey the country and the overall water situation, does it always work as smoothly as it has in Saskatchewan's case in this example, or is as well managed?
Well, if we talk about Saskatchewan, I had a chance to visit Saskatchewan, and there is a project, like if we think about Canada going forward, there's a huge project which is called the Lake Diefenbaker Irrigation Project. So basically, to summarize, it could put 500,000 acre in production, but it's an investment. The last number I saw was $4 billion that was made in 2020. So when you look at that, the first question is to ask, do we have enough water to put that amount of acres in production? Who will produce, at what cost, and how it will be managed? So, like I asked those questions to two scientific, and one of them is Dr. Pomeroy. He's let me find his title. He's chair of the Water Resources and Climate Change at University of Saskatchewan. So what Dr. Pomeroy says that, look, he said, he studies the glacier and studies the water, the castle, the Rockies since a long time. And he says, we've seen that the half of as much snow on the lower slope of the Rocky as there was 50 years ago. The glaciers will be melting and there will be more rain. But his models predict that a 20% increase in flow of the Saskatchewan River. But he says that, yes, Lake Diefenbaker will be able to support an irrigation project and meet the demand from other users. On the other hand, this is where I think it's important, 2 consecutive years of drought would seriously compromise the reservoir water reserves. He pointed out, like in an interview, that Canada doesn't have the high capacity reservoir like the ones found in Colorado or California. So in times of prolonged drought, water use from Lake Diefenbaker will need to be adjusted among users. And the other scientific interview is Dr. David Sunchin. He's from the Prairie Farm, they call that CAPI. It's the Prairie Adaptation Research Collaborative. And he rings a kind of, alarm bell in saying that every 100 years, there's a serious drought in the I would call it the Palliser triangle. If you look at the amount of water, like I think it was in 2 years ago in the Palliser triangle, it was less than 250 millimeters. So, like what he says is that we should not be overconfident. We have to prepare for that type of situation. That's for Saskatchewan, but all over, I would say all over Canada, there's need to adapt. Like when you talk to farmers in Quebec, too much water, it's too much water. In Quebec, we get 1,000 millimeter of water per year annually. Now imagine if you get that much water in 1 month and a half. So how do you adjust the structure? How do you adjust your farm to be able to adapt with really tough drought, a prolonged drought of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then have all that water coming almost at the same time? This is where the adaptation for farmers, infrastructures come in the portrait, if I can say so.
Yeah. I know you mentioned earlier, Nicolas, that one of the barriers, I may be putting words in your mouth here, one of the barriers to doing a better job managing water is we need more data and more monitoring. Is this another example, the need for more infrastructure for reservoirs to hold water back when we do have too much at one time and need to save it for later? Is it fair to say that is also a barrier right now preventing us from being more efficient and being better stewards of our water?
For sure. Now we have a bank of infrastructure in Canada. Is there any studies at a Canadian level to find out what type of infrastructure Canadian producers need all over Canada? I talked to you about the $4 billion of a project in Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project. But that's true in Alberta, where you need to maintain the existing district water district association. You need in Quebec, I mean, they are talking about infrastructure, but who will pay? If you take a pipeline from the St. Lawrence River and bring it to a point A to point B where there's not enough water, who will pay for that? So we need to have, I would say, a kind of a master of orchestra somewhere to have a good idea, especially for the next, I would say, 20, 30 years. This is really, really important. I think water issue is more important than rare metals to build electric cars. We need to have that approach. Water is vital to feed people. So you need a plan somewhere.
Yeah, we have a national critical mineral strategy,
Yeah.
a water action plan or something like that.
Yeah. You see, they say it creates jobs, it creates, it's the future to electric car, the future and things like that. That's okay. But look, a good crisis in water and you bring the things to the table. Let's just think that where are coming from our vegetables, fruit and vegetable, it's come from California. Well, look at California. We could talk about that if you want to, but you see, we really have California has a really huge problem, water problem management. So how Canada can, is there an opportunity here for Canada or even Saskatchewan growers to grow more fruit and vegetables when you think that the growing season has gone from 110 days per year to 120? So, there's a lot of thought to be put in there.
Yeah. Shawn, Nicolas has referenced the Lake Diefenbaker project several times here. Can you maybe tell us a bit of background on that project? Bring us up to speed where it's at now. It's basically something that was started in the 1950s and hasn't been seriously worked on since the 70s.
Yeah, Saskatchewan is very fortunate. We have this gem of Lake Diefenbaker, and it was the vision of Prime Minister Diefenbaker at the time. Because of the devastating droughts of the 30s, how do we drought-proof Saskatchewan? And so when the reservoir was built in the late 60s, they had envisioned 500,000 acres of irrigation out of Lake Diefenbaker. Right now, we're only irrigating about 145,000 acres out of the lake. So that potential was never fully realized. I think for a lot of people, they don't realize how big Lake Diefenbaker is. Lake Diefenbaker is 225 kilometers long. It's got a surface area of 110,000 acres. There's 800 kilometers of shoreline, and there's a massive amount of water in that lake. So, for example, the annual evaporation out of that lake is about 250, roughly 250,000 acre feet of water evaporates every year. So irrigation, if we build out this project, will actually use less water than evaporates off of Lake Diefenbaker in any given year. And so there's an incredible amount of storage. Now, of course, we have to manage that, as Nicolas said, and that's, again, part of what our agency does. We're studying, the inflows of the water. We're studying, monitoring the water usage, making sure, there is enough water. Because Lake Diefenbaker does supply 60% of Saskatchewan's population for their drinking water. But again, to put that in perspective, 1 meter of water would supply over 300,000 homes for their water needs for 18 years. And, there's several hundred meters of water in Lake Diefenbaker. So it's a very, very large lake. So the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project, Premier Moe announced back at SARM in March, the next step, the first 90,000 acres of that project. And we're just on going to be doing some more of the engineering and studies of that. That would bring 90,000 acres of irrigated acres, additional acres to Saskatchewan. And it's basically, we're looking at the rehabilitation of the West Side Canal. When the lake was built in the late 60s, in the early 70s, they began construction of a canal and a pump house on the west side of Lake Diefenbaker, but decisions of governments of the day stopped that project. So there's 43 kilometers of existing canal that we're going to take a look at, and that's what this next phase that the Premier talked about. How do we rehab that? What does it look like, and how do we bring those acres on? And so that's our focus right now, as well as irrigation in other parts parts of Saskatchewan where there is a need. Where we're doing some work around with the Luck Lake Irrigation District. We're doing some exploring in the southeast part of the province. We're adding acres on what we call the Seuss Canal that flows out of the east side of Diefenbaker towards Saskatoon. So there's an increasing demand and desire to irrigate more acres. And as Nicolas pointed, there's more and more need for food. Not only your traditional crops, but our vegetables. So if we can start producing more vegetables here in Saskatchewan for use in Canada, that reduces the need of importing and transporting these crops thousands of kilometers from other parts of the world. So I think there's huge opportunity when it comes to irrigation.
I think this is a big question. Maybe this is one of the big questions of what we're trying to cover here. But Shawn, how do you approach balancing all the different interests when it comes to water? You have people that live in the larger cities in Saskatchewan that depend on it for drinking water, of course. You've got people that have cabins on the lake. You have livestock operations that depend on water. You have irrigation and a government intent on expanding irrigated acres to support food production and economic opportunity there as well. How do you go about balancing all those different interests?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kelvin. There is a lot of interest to balance, and we do work at balancing that. So part of the studies that when we were looking at irrigation expansion is doing hydrological studies to make sure there is enough water, first of all. And our data so far is showing there is enough water that flows into the lake. And there's enough storage on the lake to help, meet those needs. We have to take into account what there is for, domestic use. And again, we are confident there's enough water there. And then as well as, recreation and, habitat. WSA, we spend a lot of time each year on the environmental side. We do census on the piping plover. It's an endangered species that one of its largest nesting grounds is the shores of Lake Diefenbaker. And so we spend a fair bit of time and money doing a census and counting the birds and making sure if nests are too close to where the water is, they're moved so they're not impacted. And we do other studies as well. We work with other ministries within the government of Saskatchewan, on this, whether it's agriculture, Sask Power, because there's a power generation plant just off of Lake Diefenbaker. So that is the role. What we have to do, we have to balance, because water is for everybody.
So Nicolas, from your perspective, in Saskatchewan, I think it's fair to say that agriculture is part of the conversation when it comes to developing water policy. Is agriculture at the table as much as it needs to be in other parts of Canada?
Well, in Quebec, it's a big part. When you say agriculture, now look, when we say agriculture, when we talk about water, it's not only water for producers. It's also water for processors. And this is something you cannot forget. In the case of Saskatchewan, it's just come back very quick on that. It's always the egg and the chicken dilemma. And one of the questions I had is that why Outlook didn't become Lethbridge? And the answer is that you need a volume of certain crops or certain meat to have a slaughterhouse or a processing facility. So this discussion with water, you talk about the price of electricity, the two things. And in Quebec, the price of, if we take about water and processing, Quebec it doesn't have it's not a huge, how could I say, it's a little Nordic garden, if I can say so. But all 70% of the production is processed in Quebec. So there's a very, how could I say, it's very astute for the processors to know what the volume available and especially the price of electricity. So in order to be, I would say, competitive, you need to have a price of electricity and water to process your food, and it could be, and I come back to Saskatchewan. If you want to attract big players, let's say it like that, you need to offer not only the volume of water, but also to have a price of electricity which will be competitive with the U.S., for example. So that's one thing when you look at it. And also, when you think about it, for the price tag in Saskatchewan was $4 billion. If you split it per family, it's $16,000 per family you ask for to have that new irrigation project. Well, the same apply everywhere. You know, you have to share, like Mr. Jaques explained, you have to share that water. There's a price to be paid. Who will maintain what agency will maintain the infrastructure? So in Quebec, it's a big issue, like we said before, like, well, we need infrastructure. Is it public fund which will construct it? Will farmers pay for water or will pay for infrastructure? There's all kind of I would say questions like that has to be asked or debate.
What happens when the majority of the population, though, doesn't see the benefit and doesn't want to put up that $1,000 per house, tens of thousands of dollars per household? What happens, or what's at risk for agriculture if our voice isn't heard in this?
Well, Kelvin, if I may ask, I can answer that very quickly. Is that you have more people living in town today than in the rural community or farmers. We have about, in Canada, less than 200,000 farmers for a population of 41 million people. So the lack of, I would say, everyone had not long ago, in less than 3 generations, we have lost our roots with farmers, with the rural community. So you have that misunderstanding between the rural community and people living in a city. And water should be understood. The Canadians are using water per capita. We are blessed, more than blessed, for the water we have. So there has to be a discussion of how to use water between the cities and producing food. And you don't drink oil, you drink water. So there's you need to have a lot of education to be made and a lot of discussion to be made. That might be maybe a point where the Canadian Water Agency could have a role educating both farmers and also the city people. And you know, when you look, I just add this very quickly. You have, I don't know if you ever heard about that, the Century Initiative. They want to bring they want Canada to be 100 million people within 2100. Look, in a province like Saskatchewan, which has only 1.2 million people, you grow up the number of population quite drastically. Well, you will have conflicts. You need to prepare for that. So again, watershed management or the agency, like Mr. Jaques is working with, those are keys to the discussion.
This is an opinion question, so I'll direct it at you, Nicolas. The Canada Water Agency, is that a step in the right direction in terms of having a vision for water in Canada?
I don't know. I haven't looked. I haven't looked at their mandate, especially with agriculture. I'm not too sure agriculture is on the top of the agenda of the federal government, neither the protection of agricultural land. So you have this senator from Rob Black from Ontario, who just submitted a project asking Mr. Trudeau to think about a better protection of urban sprawl. Now, water is linked to that. If you spread concrete and roads on the best land, you don't recharge your aquifers. I mean, you need somewhere someone thinking about all those issues and put the puzzle together. Now, does the Canadian Water Agency? I don't know the people who are there, or like I cannot comment on that. But that would be a mandate, considering the issues of climate change, water, food security. This is and Canada's role in the world.
Yeah. Shawn, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, much what Nicolas said. The agency is in its infancy, and we don't, really fully understand exactly, what their mandate is. As the Water Security Agency, we've had some conversations with officials from the Canada Water Agency, but what Saskatchewan's made very clear is that because we have our agency that's responsible for regulations and monitoring and all of those pieces, that we don't need another agency to duplicate what we're already doing. But if the water agency was there to help, as Nicolas said, on some of the research and how do we, how can you collaborate? How can they help maybe with some of the infrastructure, some of the funding? Then there probably is a role for such an agency. But if it's going to duplicate, what provinces are already doing, I don't know what value that would bring to it.
So much of this conversation, we've been talking about quantity of water and kind of assuming quality. Quality and quantity, I think, are closely related. When we talk about quantity, it's of course of the right quality. Is there, as we talk about having a plan and strategy for water going forward, is there a place where agriculture as an industry, where we need to also be showing that we're doing our part on the quality side of things in terms of having a credibility at the table in conversations about how water is allocated, how water is used?
You want me to answer that?
Nicolas, go ahead. Sure.
Well, sure. And it is, agriculture is a social contract when you think about it. The funds that the public fund which goes to agriculture, the support program for producers. So in return, what the farmer, the responsibility somewhere is clean water. And so we go to best management practices. I will talk just very briefly. There's a Transboundary agreement between Quebec and Vermont for the Lac Champlain. Like I said at the beginning, it's the 8th biggest lake in the United States. So what happened is that since 20 years, the level of phosphorus has not even diminished big, So in the United States, they have the Clean Water Act, which will allow the federal government to sue states which doesn't reduce their level of phosphorus in the lake. So where comes from that phosphorus? Well, it comes from various places, but producers, according to according to the researchers, one expert, 1/3 comes from agriculture. So there is a responsibility there. So what best management you can have? You have the rotation of crops, conservation tillage, riparian buffers. All those practices should be almost natural for producers to do that. Some of them are really top notch. Others less and less. Less. Why? Because you have to put yourself in the shoes of the farmer. If he's indebted, big debt, you think he will think environment first? No, he will go at the price of corn, the price of soya, and he might extend his crops to the next to the river. That's happened a lot. So how do you change that? How do you respond to that? So that's a lot of a lot of thought programs to have a more greener agriculture. Those are, so I just mentioned that because between Quebec and the Vermont, I was at a meeting and some of the Americans told me, when you cross the border to go to Quebec, we see corn and soya up to the rivers, and you don't see that on the American side because they use more, how can I say, buffers, or they grow more hay. There is more dairy production than there is swine production on the other side in Quebec. So those things have to be discussed and be part of a larger plan.
Yeah. I think as a wrap up then, Shawn, in terms of looking ahead the next 10, 20 years in farming, say I'm a farmer in Saskatchewan or anywhere in Canada, what should we be thinking of and focusing on when it comes to having water access and the quality of water that we need for running a sprayer or feeding livestock or for processing operations that support demand for crops that we grow? What are some of the things that farmers need to be thinking of and maybe advocating for when it comes to policies around water stewardship and management?
Yeah, maybe if I could just add a couple comments to Nicolas's last point. I mean,
For sure.
producers are good stewards of the land. It's how producers make their livelihood. The majority of producers, really do care about, the land, the environment, and making sure we're getting the best use. And, when you take a province like Saskatchewan, where we have half of Canada's arable acres here, agriculture is very, very important. And again, I kind of go back to, what the mandate of our agency is. We're there to help, facilitate or work with producers on the development of irrigation with the Ministry of Agriculture. But then we're also responsible for monitoring and ensuring that quality of water that Nicolas talked about is there. We regulate all the wastewater plants in our province. We have monitoring systems on the major river systems. We do a lot of work testing quality of lakes in our province, checking for river health, water health, things like that, to make sure that we have that abundant supply of sustainable, healthy water that we need, for all uses, as you said, Kelvin. Whether it's water for irrigation, water for processing, water for human consumption. So I think that's what's really important.
Okay. Nicolas, what do you see as kind of the next steps? I know you've written an entire paper, or series of papers, including one on the need for a national water action plan, I believe is the terminology, that people can find that on CAPI's website. What do you see as keys to the sustainability of our water here in Canada going forward?
I think it should become a priority, like and who will take the ball? Will it be each minister of agriculture of each provinces? Would it be the Canadian Water Agency? One thing is sure is that, like Mr. Jaques said, the producers should be involved. I mean, they are the first one to be on the land, so they should be part of a discussion. Yeah, we should have much more R&D on innovation. I'll give you an example, a simple example: irrigation. The Canadian champions in irrigation are Alberta producers. If you if you go there and you compare to other places, so would it be, there could be a shared experience between farmers from Alberta with other part of the country. This is, between farmers. A collaborative approach, like Mr. Jaques, the Canadian Water Agency, it's like the health system. If the federal goes and say, to this province, you should do this, you should do that, no, it has to be a kind of a leadership of, it always helped to have money, like if you help an infrastructure and things like that, but to be a leader with a vision, I would say. So that's the point I would say. And again, I come back to that, the data, and also recognizing water as an economic value. Yeah, like even for biosecurity, we go to COP 17, COP whatever. How could I say that? The swamp, not the swamp, but where the water goes and is stagnant for biodiversity. We should put a price on ecological services. That's the only way we will not only protect our land, but also our water. And the price of water should be discussed. It's funny. We pay for diamonds, we don't pay for water. Somewhere, and also there's different ways to approach water. And this is where maybe we should have a better understanding of indigenous way to see water. I didn't have a chance when I was in Saskatchewan to go in the Delta, where you have indigenous people, to hear their voice, how they see that a huge project like that. So you need a conversation, except that conversation should start now. It's not, governments, it's always responsive. No, government should plan. So I hope that the Canadian Water Agency, or what Mr. Jaques just said, a kind of a leadership and an approach where we can all think, because when you think about it, we are all in the same bath.
Kelvin, if I can add just a couple comments, if you don't mind, to what Nicolas said, and I think it's important, like the sustainability of agriculture. This isn't my area of expertise, but I know, the province of Saskatchewan works with the Global Institute for Food Security at the University of Saskatchewan, and I know the Ministry of Ag works closely with them. And they've been doing research, and they've put out information, just how sustainable agriculture production is in our province. And I think that's important. I think, the research that they're doing and putting out, and then we can demonstrate to the world, our products grown here are sustainable. We are taking into account all of those things that, you had mentioned earlier, Nicolas. So I think that is something that, we are focused on it. And then going back to the irrigation project, if we can produce vegetables or other crops here in our province versus importing them from thousands of miles away, that's being very sustainable and making good use of the water that we have.
Yeah. Again, going back to that idea of viewing water as the valuable critical resource that it is in many essential for life. It goes without saying, but it's something that we often take for granted. There's many other angles to this that we could continue our conversation, and I look forward to doing that someday, but we'll wrap it up now, and thank you both, Nicolas and Shawn, for joining us for this episode of the Ag Policy Connection.
Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you, Kelvin.